After being chased by crows while riding her unicycle through Cook Park last year, she has since decided that she will never have a pet bird. This also means she will not attend any college with a bird as its mascot. After realizing that every college she applied to, Illinois State, Kansas, Ball State, and Boston College, have birds as their mascots, she withdrew all of her applications and has decided to travel for the next 4 years. Say hello to Annalisa Wingman Waddick.
Nice. She could not have known what would happen when she freed a murder of crows in Cook Park last year. But since that time, she has perfected her slingshot marksmanship and hunted down those squawking scavengers. She has also begun a campaign to have Alfred Hitchcock movies given an R rating, even though they're perfectly fine, unless your sister has a weird bird phobia. Please welcome Emily Bullseye Waddick. All right, if we could have the two of you come to the middle of the stage and face each other, but give yourselves a little bit of space. Mr. Schmidt is going to determine who goes first, not by flipping a coin, but by flipping a rubber chicken. Please cover your heads. He's not good at this. So he's going to flip the chicken, and whoever has the head of the chicken pointing closer to her is going to go first. Emily, you are our first contestant for Right Club. All right, you can use any of the mics. Yes, you can take it off a stand. Yep. Mrs. Shabeck is keeping time for you down here. If they hit 6 minutes, they're yanked off stage immediately at 6 minutes. It happened to Dr. Polenta's last period. It was sad, but not really. Yeah.
We'll just stay here. Picture this. You're on a first date, and the person across from you, wow. But then they open their mouth, and all that pours out is a one-way monologue listing off everything from their eye color to their age to their social security number, and it feels more like data processing or counseling than a date. But then picture this. That same date now asking questions about you and your childhood, your favorite food, and whether you prefer dogs to cats. The same situation has gone from disaster date to delightful dinner in 5 seconds flat, and all it took was a good question or two. Now, everyone has heard that there is no such thing as a foolish question. Teachers are always commenting this, attempting to persuade a lone hand to rise among the class and clear up some confusion by asking one or a series of queries about today's math lesson or the theme of the book. If someone asks, what is 2 plus 2? They're attempting to broaden their knowledge, to expand their intellectual horizons. Even seemingly simple questions hold meaning and hold purpose, for at some age you did not know the answer to 2 plus 2. On the flip side of the coin, there are answers. Both the companion and arch nemesis of questions, these little attention seekers attempt to steal intellectual credit when in fact they are not even necessary. Think about it. There are no foolish questions, but there are some very foolish answers. 2 plus 2 is not 5. End of discussion. Questions and answers are not a chicken or the egg type of situation. Questions come first because, simply stated, there would be no answers if it wasn't for questions. Questions are the root of answers, the seed from which answers grow. You can't begin to search for an answer if you cannot first comprehend the need to ask a question. And there is always a need to ask a question, to find out if they have that dress in your size, to find out the name of the new student who sits by you in English, to find out new places and people and ideas and knowledge. There is not always a need for an answer. Indeed, some questions are asked specifically for the sake of asking questions. Take science, for example. Science is all about asking questions without arriving at concrete answers. Famous French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss articulated as, the scientist is not a person who gives the right answers, he's one who asks the right questions. In fact, science does not hold one right, concrete answer, for all conclusions are theories, not absolutes. Instead, it teaches scientists to ask more questions, better questions, smarter questions, gathering more data and observations as they go, lighting the path for scientific development. And it's not only in relation to unknown answers that questions have power. Rhetorical questions are defined by an online dictionary as questions that have an obvious answer but have been asked to make a point, to persuade, or for literary effect. Rhetorical questions draw the reader or listener to one conclusion and leave the need for an answer behind in the dust. If you went up to a group of 100 people and asked, "Where do you want to be in 10 years?" you're going to garner many different responses. If you were to issue a more controversial question, perhaps something in the political realm, the responses would be even more different, even more conflicting. Yet this is not unfavorable, for imagine how boring and tedious our world would be if a question could only elicit one response. Luckily, this is not what questions do, for they elicit hundreds of responses. Instead, questions act as the match that sparks discussion and debate, and without them, our world would be a monotonous place lacking conversation. The power of a question is endless. They clear up misunderstanding between people. They pave the way for innovation. They act as the key to discovery. They provide information. They drive people apart. They bring people together. They ignite debate. They elicit advice. They lead to knowledge. They fuel the need for more questions. They are the beginning of everything. And they get people thinking. How could you top that?
All right, Annalisa, let's see what you've got, because you now have to battle the topic of answers.
Do you have a pencil? A pencil? Yeah. No, okay. I don't know. Pencil. Can I borrow it? Real last minute edit here. You know. The writing life. Honestly. Okay. Yeah. How can cancer be cured? One of medicine's most common questions that if I held the answer to, honestly, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I'd be touring the world, speaking at colleges or medical clinics or the White House. And do you know why I'd be so famous? Because every single person on earth can ask that question, but not one single person on earth can give you the answer. And so herein lies my point. There's nothing special, nothing unique about asking a question, but there is something very special within the answer. Answers are underappreciated little things. Caught up in a world of what-ifs, we trick ourselves into thinking that the question is more important than the answer. We pretend that if we seemingly don't care about an answer, it will make us seem more intellectual, more mature. Really, though, people ask questions in hopes of discovering answers. They ask questions on their search for knowledge, and that knowledge is an answer. We're told our entire lives that questions can never be stupid, that you can never ask too many, and yet we're also told our entire lives to never stop searching for answers, to never settle for anything less than the solution, to push our minds to their furthest intellectual boundaries. So why is it that we live in a society that is so determined to discover these answers and yet so unwilling to label it as important? Perhaps it is our need to feel intellectual, philosophical, theoretical. Perhaps it is because we live in a world where some answers are hard to find, although really that only increases their value once they are uncovered. Perhaps it ties to the idea that the path is more important than the destination, although I would argue that there would be no path in the first place if the destination was not first dreamed of. How can Miley sing about the climb if she did not first yearn to know what lay at the top of the mountain? See, if life was all about asking questions instead of finding the answers, if the answers were as much of a forgotten thing as people say they are, there would be no point to asking questions at all. The scientific method was first created because people wanted answers to the unanswerable. They yearned after this unknown. An answer is the thing that is sought after, not the question that brought about the answer. Okay, so think about them as an escalator, right? They're there because you need to go from floor 1 to floor 2. People don't go on escalators for the sake of going on escalators. They go on escalators to reach that top floor, to reach that desired destination, or in this case, to reach an answer. Let's go back to my example about curing cancer, okay? Every single question that has ever been asked on the search to find a treatment was for one purpose and one purpose only, to find a cure. Imagine our world if all we had were questions. Imagine our world if Martin Luther King only asked about a dream. If Aristotle questioned whether or not we are what we repeatedly do, if McDonald's catchphrase was, "I'm loving it," We don't stop at the question. We can't stop at the question. Because while it is true that questions lead to more questions, what they really lead to is knowledge, information, education, and all these things are answers. It is the answers to the questions we ask that fuel our development, the progress we make as we go out and discover and explore and innovate to uncover parts of the solution. Questions are simply a means by which we arrive at these answers. Answers are definitive. Answers are steady and unwavering. Answers are concrete and give useful, I dare say vital information. Because picture this. So you're bleeding out in the middle of the street, and paramedics are everywhere, and everyone just keeps shouting, "What's her blood type? What's her blood type?" Do you want them to just keep asking the question, or do you want someone to rush on the scene and answer the question and save your life? Answers settle debate. Answers help you plan your next steps. Answers give you the final piece of the puzzle. Answers help you get somewhere, either figuratively or in everyday life. Another example, picture this, right? You're lost in some city and you're late for a big interview and you need to know how to get to 42nd Street. So you're asking a bunch of people, but the physical act of asking for directions does you no good. You need that concrete answer to go 3 blocks left and then 1 block right. No one ever cheats off a friend during a math test to get the right questions. No one searches up the question key. And it's not called Yahoo Questions for a reason. It's time that we acknowledge the power of answers. It's time that we push past our ignorance and open our eyes to see what we have been looking for all along. It's time that we give credit to answers, to the things propelling us forward into discovery of all fields. It's time that we really stopped to think about what we're searching for. It's time we found the answer.
All right, you are now going to decide who won that bout. And you're going to do it with your applause. Mr. Schmidt is going to be a human applause meter. So, think about who debated her topic better. And please applaud if you think that that was Emily debating questions. Please applaud if you think the winner of this bout is Annalisa debating answers. Our winner is Annalisa. Congratulations and thank you to both of you. Annalisa, you don't win anything. Sorry.
Just bragging rights. Oh, yeah. For life. All that matters. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Make that our Christmas card this year. I do.
It would be striking. Okay, let's welcome our last presenter for this period. It is, of course, Mr. Christopher Thomas, who directs our theater program, and he's an amazing English teacher, and he's a great storyteller, and he's a good friend, and a nice husband and father, and I like him.
Look at that. So I grew up in a big, loud Italian family in West Chicago, West Side of in this neighborhood that, thank you, in this, and lots of my cousins lived near me as well, close to West Chicago, so I grew up in, with almost like 18 brothers and sisters, even though they were just my cousins. And the matriarch of our family was my grandmother, and we were just loud and crazy. You kind of had to have a thick skin to grow up in my family. Consequently, even though they were very loving, I also didn't feel like many people really got me, really understood me. My family would make fun of me like, "Oh, Christopher, he's the sensitive one." My aunt would always say, if you looked at me the wrong way, I'd go cry in a closet. I hope that's changed as I've grown up. But it just still felt like no one really understood me. Even my friends, too, kind of felt like no one got me. And that's kind of the way I went through my years growing up. But one of the things that happened to me when I was little was people would always used to make fun of my ears, because imagine this face, except a little bit smaller on a 10-year-old, but the ears stay the same size. So even when I was like a little kid, people called me Dumbo, you know, big ears. Even my family, my aunt, my own flesh and blood, came to see me once, and she was like, I had gone through puberty at that point, and she's like, "Oh, Christopher, look, your face finally grew into your ears." Thanks, Aunt Lou. So These ears were also something that I got from my grandmother. My grandmother, her name was Fortunata La Monica, a beautiful Italian name. It means beautiful treasure. And she was a treasure. She had this ultimate frown that stayed consistently on her face, like this. And when she smiled, she just dropped her lower jaw. And that was her smile. So you didn't necessarily feel love and warmth coming off from it. And from my grandmother, you just kind of knew that she loved you. And my grandma had this early morning ritual. She would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, go downstairs into our kitchen, and whenever she would stay the weekend with us, she would start banging pots and pans around. Banging them so loudly for 15 minutes. And you're like, Grandma, you used 2 pots to make pasta sauce. But she would bang them around, spatula, bunk, right? Out comes the big pot, dunk, on the stove. She suddenly bangs it into something else, ching, chunk, bunk. So everybody else in the house would wake up with Grandma at 5:30 in the morning, kind of knowing okay, Grandma's making her pasta sauce. Now, it was worth it for the pasta sauce. This is what we called our homemade zugu. So our zugu was our Italian word for just our homemade pasta sauce that she would make for us. It was delicious. And as the day went on, she would make this over hours upon hours. The smell of the zugu would fill the entire house, and you just kind of felt home. You knew that this was our soul food as Italians. This was who we were, our homemade zugu. So, if my grandma wasn't waking us up making zugu, she would wake us up by calling us. So if she wasn't with us in the house, she would call from the house to see what we were doing. And the other thing is my grandma had no idea the amount of noise that she was actually making because she couldn't hear. For most of her senior life, she really couldn't hear anything. So she had no clue how much noise these pots were making. And when she would call us over the phone, it was also a problem. So she'd call, and for some reason, nobody else picked up the phone in our house. It's a landline. So I pick it up, and I'm like, good morning, hello. And she's like, Christopher! No, sorry, wait. This time, I remember distinctly one time over spring break. She's like, Patty? I'm like, no, Graham, it's Christopher. As a teenage male, she thinks I'm my mother. I'm like, no, it's Christopher. And she's like, what? Hello? Who is this? I'm like, Grandma, it's Christopher. Christopher, what are you doing home? It's a Monday. And this is how she talked. And I'm like, Grandma, it's spring break. Wait, what? And I'm like, it's spring. Are you sick? Do you have the flu? I'm like, Grandma, it's spring break. Let me turn my hearing aids on. Grandma, spring break. Oh, that's nice. I'm like, okay, where's your mother? So I get my mom, she gets on the phone. It's 6 in the morning. I'm like, Grandma, can't you let a guy just sleep in? I remember one particular time that my grandma was there in the morning, and it was the Wednesday of Thanksgiving break. I was in 6th grade, and she woke the whole house up making pasta sauce, making our zugu. Now, that's because Italians don't just eat turkey on Thanksgiving, but they eat Italian food like lasagna the day before, and then also on Friday and Saturday after Thanksgiving too, as many carbs as we can get in. So she's making our pasta sauce, but this time I didn't mind, because on this Wednesday, I was gonna go to school and tell my friend Sarah that I was in love with her. 6th grade, 12-year-old romantic Christopher Thomas was finally going to spill the beans. So I tell and we were good friends, but I had heard from Sarah's best friend, Liz, that Sarah liked me. So I was like, score! Finally, my friend Sarah, she sees me, she knows who I am, she gets me. We're going to be a boyfriend and girlfriend. I'm going to have a girlfriend. I was so excited. So I go to school, and I decide before I tell Sarah, I better ask Liz first how I'm going to do this. So I wrote a note to Liz, and I'm like, all right, I feel the same way about Sarah, what do you suggest? And I put it all down on paper, this here's my ideas, I could tell her this way, I could, tell her at lunchtime, I could tell her after school, right before we get on the bus. I write all these things down in a letter, and I fold it up, and I get on the bus that morning, and I see Liz, and she's sitting by Sarah on the bus. So I'm like, okay, play it cool. I'm gonna give it to Liz after we get off the bus. So I do. The whole day goes by, and I don't hear back from Liz at all. So I'm like, abort. Do not say anything without the blessing of the best friend. Who knows? So the day ends, and that Thanksgiving it was snowing for some reason, that Wednesday before break. So it had started snowing, and I go outside, and I'm walking through the snow, and I get on the bus, and as I board the bus, I see Liz and Sarah in the very last seats of the bus with my letter open, and they're laughing. And my heart, my romantic heart sank. And I felt so sad and betrayed. And I couldn't believe it's Sarah, who I thought she knew me, she got me, she saw me, and yet it was a joke. Like, she didn't like me. So I was like, oh. So I just sink down into the bus, and the whole ride home, I'm, just waiting for the bus ride to get over. And the bus drops me off at my house before Sarah and Liz get off the bus. And as I'm going off the bus, I remember walking down the last 3 steps to get off the bus. And as I do, I hear this noise. It's like, vroom, vroom. And as I make the last step, I realize, oh my gosh, my backpack has been breaking lately. Like the zipper, you guys know when your zipper's open and people are like, oh, close your zipper. Like, I take that last step and I hear zoop, and all of my belongings in my backpack, everything spills out right on the pavement in front of the bus. And I'm like, seriously? So I turn around and I start gathering up the papers and all the things that the teacher sent home with you over Thanksgiving break, and I'm putting them, stuffing them into my broken backpack, and I realize the bus is just sitting there. Everyone is watching me from the bus. They're like crowding at the windows. Why aren't we moving? They're looking, and I look up and I see the bus driver, and he has this huge handlebar mustache, and his mouth is open and hanging, and he's just staring, looking at me like, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what don't you understand how awful this is for a 6th grader? So I look at him, and all I can get out is, you can go! And he like closes his mouth, closes the door, and drives away. As he drives away, though, I don't know if it was a gust from the bus, that's how I remember it, maybe a wind came by and blows all of my papers across the snow that had fallen on this hill. So now, not only do I see Sarah and Liz looking at me from the back window of the bus, driving away, I see all of these papers, and I'm just like, I hate my life. So I go, and I'm picking up the papers, and I'm putting them in, and I grab my backpack, and I stumble into my house, and I shut the door, and I literally dramatically lean back against the door, like, oh, finally, Thanksgiving break. And then the smell hits me as my grandmother's zugu. And all of a sudden, I feel like, okay, it's gonna be okay. I'm home. And I hear, Patty? I'm like, no, Graham, it's Christopher. She comes shuffling in from the kitchen, and she looks at me. And she looks up, and she looks down, and she just goes. I'm like, okay, so I start walking. I'm like, Grandma, I've just had a day, And she grabs me by the back of the head, and she starts pushing me into the kitchen, and right up to the pot where the stove is. And she grabs off a chunk of Italian white bread, and she dips it in the zugu, and she literally just puts it in front of my face, and she says manja, which is Italian for eat. As I eat it, manja means to fulfill, to eat, and I feel like she's feeding me, right? Like she's feeding my soul. My grandma knew. She could tell that I needed this. And as if to say, thank you, Grandma, thank you, I needed this moment of really all of a sudden knowing that someone understood me. And I look up at her and I say, thanks, Graham. To which she says, what? Speak up! I let it go, because in that moment I knew that although my grandma never could hear me, when it was important, she saw me. Thank you.
We're going to let you ask some questions of Mr. Thomas if you'd like to.
Q&A. Do I have any speech students in here? Yeah, it's like your own hot seat.
Oh my goodness,
there you go.
there are already some. Are those questions or are those just speech students?
I think those are speech students.
Well, let's get it. Richard has a question. 3?
No. He asked in my speech class, if you guys ever take speech, we do this thing called hot seat where we get quizzed. And Richie's question is, if I could be a tree, what kind of tree would I be and why? I think I would be an evergreen tree because they're coniferous, so they kind of stay the same all throughout. They're steadfast even through the winters, You can decorate them to be like a Christmas tree, bring joy, good stuff like that. And then yet during the summers, they still get to enjoy that too. So I'm like all 4 seasons.
All right, we have a question now from.
So the zugu, I'll share the recipe, but it's one of those things that I learned how to make it from my grandmother. I have 18 cousins, and about 3 of us actually know how to make it, including me. And she just showed me several times. And then my mom has a little bit different way of making it. My aunts do. I have my own way. So hit me up. I'll tell you later. Yeah.
Mr. Thomas, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You, I know, had several stories. You were kind of kicking around and kind of deciding which one you wanted to tell.
Sure.
Can you just tell us a little bit what made you choose this one and how did you go about deciding how to put it together?
So one of the stories that is always interesting to people that I was going to share was the time that I spent 3 months in Kenya in between my sophomore and junior year of college. And it wasn't like a college organized thing, I just went and I kind of made my own way there. And one of the things that ended up happening to me was I ended up helping deliver a baby when I was there. It's a crazy story, it was, and I love that moment, but I chose this story because it took place in middle school and I felt like most people can relate to the awfulness of middle school. So I was like, so I chose that story instead. And also, my grandma passed away a few years ago, and I've been thinking about her a lot lately for some reason, so it just felt right. Alec?
Does your family still own that restaurant on Taylor Street?
Oh yeah, Pompeii Bakery. So anybody been to Pompeii? It's Taylor Street by kind of U of I, that area, University of Illinois, Chicago. Yeah, Alec's been there. So it's in Italian families, you have like extended family and they're all just family, right? So it's my cousin's family's restaurant. And yeah, they still own that one there. There was another one in Oak Brook for a while, but they closed that one down.
Right, I'm
It's
coming
good
to the
pizza.
back. Here I come. That's my running music. Okay. Go ahead.
If you could have any superpower, what would your superpower be?
So, for those of you that watch X-Men, Jean Grey, it's like the superpower of superpowers, right? When I was a kid, I always used to pretend that I could be telekinetic, right? Because like it's a superpower that can create superpowers, right? So it's like the ultimate. It's like wishing for more wishes, right? So it's the best superpower there is. Any other questions?
Do you still know Sarah?
Yeah, actually, we became great friends after that, believe it or not. We actually dated for a little while in high school. I know, worked out.
Does she remember the story?
Oh, yeah, she remembers. I never let her forget that. Because I'm like, remember how awful you were laughing at me? And yeah, so she lives in New York now. We're still friends. She was in my wedding, actually. Yeah.
I just was wondering how you went about like crafting your story because I just loved how it went full circle and that just touched my heart and I almost cried. So how did you almost get me crying?
So only I think juniors or seniors might remember when there was a woman here from The Moth who shared a little bit about how to create a good effective story. And so I took some notes from her and she and I emailed back after she was here at Writers Week. And I remember actually last year I had another story to share. It wasn't actually neither the Kenya one or this one. It was about making meals for homeless people downtown Chicago and some things that my dad taught me and stuff like that. But every story that I've tried to write after then to share in a context like this follows the Moth storyline, where you kind of come up with a gem or so a sort of like the thing that you learned or took away from it and figure out how to intersperse that in the story. So if you guys notice, I use the phrase like she saw me, she got me, like at the beginning of the story. Talk about how no one ever really understood me or saw me for who I was at the beginning. So at the end I could say my grandma saw me for who I was in that moment when I needed her to. So that was the theme throughout. And then just the stories that I shared about like my grandma and my aunt with the big ears, like those are just childhood stories that we throw around all the time. Grandma calling on the phone like happened all the time. And so we would just always mock her and make fun of her, lovingly, of course. Thule?
Mr. Thule has a question.
I'm just curious how much you had to cut during the writing process.
There were a few stories about my grandma that I was going to tell, but I was trying to keep it under a time limit, so not a ton. And I was going to go into more detail about what happened on the bus that day, but I cut that too because I felt like I got to the point.
How many of you thought that the ripping was going to be his pants?
Oh,
Yeah.
that would have been awful too.
I totally thought that's
Yeah.
where you were going, but I'm really glad it was your backpack.
Yeah, it was still awful,
Yeah.
but yeah.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, Ty? My favorite Italian dish, there's two. One of them is the zugu, the homemade sauce that we make. That with anything is fantastic. We use that for all kinds of red sauce dishes. And then the other one is called we call it garubalis. It's the Italian word for garbage. And it's like a garbage pasta, and we put like shrimp and asparagus and any vegetable you have. You put it in there with like tomatoes and garlic, and it's fabulous.
Mr. Thomas, thank you so much. We
Yeah, thanks,
appreciate
guys.
you being here. Everyone, I hope you have a lovely day. The bell's going to ring in about 30 seconds.